Imagine sitting in a small apartment in Elmira, New York, sometime in 1963. A poet named Jane Roberts and her husband Robert Butts are experimenting with an Ouija board, casually, skeptically, when something unexpected begins to happen. A voice, a presence, an intelligence that calls itself Seth starts coming through, not as a whisper, but as a torrent. A fully formed philosophical system delivered with precision and warmth, session after session, year after year. What emerged from that apartment over the next 2 decades became one of the most remarkable bodies of thought in modern history. And I, personally, am very thankful it did, because it gave me a philosophical home, a spiritual home that I could visit and receive answers that I did not find anywhere else. I believe in the Seth material. Today, we're going inside the books, one by one. The first book to reach the world was Seth Speaks, published in 1972. And if you only ever read one Seth book, this is the one. Let me read a few words from its opening. Citation begins. I do not have a physical body, yet I am writing this book. You have heard of ghost hunters. I can, quite literally, be called a ghost writer, though I do not approve of the term ghost. It is true that I am usually not seen in physical terms. I do not like the word spirit either, and yet, if your definition of that word implies the idea of a personality without a physical body, then I would have to agree that the description fits me. I address an unseen audience. However, I know that my readers exist, and therefore I shall ask each of them now to grant me the same privilege. End of citation. Seth then proceeds to lay out the foundational architecture, that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but that the brain is a receiver for consciousness that exists independently of matter. He describes what happens after physical death, the nature of the soul, and the structure of what he calls probable realities. The idea that every choice you make spawns alternate versions of experience. Seth Speaks is the overview. Then, in 1974, came the book that most people who work with this material consider the real practical core, The Nature of Personal Reality. The central quote here is one of the most important sentences Seth ever delivered. The point of power is in the present moment. This book is where Seth moves from cosmology into psychology. He argues, with remarkable precision, that every belief you hold, most of them unconscious, most of them inherited from parents or culture, acts as a literal instruction to your nervous system and, through it, to the reality around you. He talks about core beliefs, the deep assumptions that organize entire regions of your experience, your health, your relationships, your finances. Seth says they are all downstream of what you actually believe, not what you wish you believed. This isn't positive thinking, it's a rigorous diagnosis of the mechanism. After that came The Unknown Reality, a 2-volume set, and probably the most ambitious thing in the entire collection. Here, Seth goes deep into what he calls the multidimensional self. The idea that anchors it is this: you are not a self-contained, separate being. You exist in the midst of a web of electromagnetic affiliations, though that does not mean you have no individuality. It just means that consciousness is open-ended. Seth begins to describe other aspects of the self that exist outside linear time, what he calls counterparts, parallel selves living other lives simultaneously, not in sequence, but in a kind of eternal present. He also explores the nature of the dreaming self as an active, creative intelligence. Volume 2, in particular, becomes almost architectural, a blueprint of the larger self that your waking personality is just one expression of. It's a challenging reading, but it's also extraordinary. The nature of the psyche, its human expression, came next, and this one tends to be underrated. Seth turns his attention to human sexuality, creativity, and what he calls the magical approach to life. His key statement here: the soul is not something you have, it is what you are. He challenges the entire framework of how we think about gender and the psyche, arguing that the division between masculine and feminine principles inside every person is far more fluid, far more creative than any cultural story admits. He also begins to develop his ideas about what he calls Framework 1 and Framework 2, the visible world of action and the invisible field of consciousness from which that world is continuously generated. You begin to see the outline of a complete alternative to materialist psychology. Then there is the individual and the nature of mass events, and this is where Seth becomes almost prophetic. Published in 1981, this book asks a question that feels more urgent today than ever. How do collective beliefs create collective events? The anchoring quote is sharp. Natural disasters, epidemics, wars, these are the exteriorized symptoms of interior conditions. Seth argues that mass tragedies, plagues, wars, environmental crises are not random. They are the physical expression of shared belief systems playing out at scale. He doesn't moralize, he diagnoses. He says the same mechanism that creates your personal reality creates mass reality, and that if enough individual consciousnesses shift, the collective landscape shifts with them. It's one of the most quietly radical ideas in the entire body of work. Dreams, Evolution and Value Fulfillment, again a 2-volume work, is Seth's most cosmological. This is where he revisits the question of creation itself. His central claim: the universe was not created for you, it was created by you, by an agreement of consciousness at levels deeper than your waking mind. Seth reframes evolution entirely, not as random mutation and survival pressure, but as a directed, purposeful unfolding of consciousness exploring its own potential. He describes what he calls value fulfillment, the idea that every creature, every particle, every system has an innate drive not just to survive, but to expand into its fullest expression. It's a biological mysticism. It's also a direct challenge to the Darwinian story we've all inherited. The Magical Approach and The Way Toward Health are the 2 final books, and they carry the weight of endings. Jane Roberts was seriously ill by the time these sessions were recorded, and Seth's voice in them is more intimate, more gentle. In The Magical Approach, he returns to the idea that rational, linear thinking has become a kind of tyranny, a mode of thought that crowds out the intuitive, the spontaneous, the miraculous. He says the magical approach is the natural approach. He's not dismissing reason, he's asking us to hold it more lightly, to make room for what cannot be planned. The Way Toward Health was dictated as Jane was dying. It's about the beliefs underlying physical illness, the relationship between psyche and body, and the possibility of healing at the level of assumption rather than symptom. So what is the thread running through all of it? Every single book, from the first session to the last, is saying the same thing through different lenses. You are not a passive observer in a mechanical universe. You are a creative consciousness, temporarily focused in physical form, broadcasting a signal, and reality at every level is responding to that signal. This isn't metaphor. Seth insists on it as the literal description of how existence works. And he isn't alone in pointing there. Neville Goddard called it the law of assumption. Jung called it the unconscious made manifest. The Vedanta traditions called it Maya, the dream of the separate self. What's remarkable is how precisely these threads converge across centuries and cultures on the same essential recognition. And here's where it stops being historical and becomes personal. Because the question Seth kept returning to, session after session, book after book, wasn't, is this true? The question was, what are you actually believing right now beneath the surface of what you say you want? What are the instructions you are quietly broadcasting? Most of us have never looked. Most of us are running belief systems installed in childhood, reinforced by a culture that insists the world is happening to you rather than through you. The Seth books, taken together, are an invitation to examine that operating system. Not to be told what to believe, but to discover what you already believe and to understand that you can choose again. Start with Seth Speaks to get the map. Move into the nature of personal reality to begin the real inner work. And then let the rest of the library unfold in whatever order your intuition pulls you. These are not books you read once. They are books you grow into. Different passages will mean entirely different things to you 5 years from now than they do today, because you will have changed, and the books, in a strange way, will seem to have changed with you. Thank you for listening and for joining me today. Be kind and send out some beautiful ripples into the universe. Until next time, my friends.